Disappointment rarely arrives loudly. Most of the time, it appears in quiet moments, when something doesn't unfold the way you expected, when effort doesn't return the result you imagined, or when someone responds differently than you hoped they would. Nothing dramatic happens. No clear breaking point. Life continues almost exactly as it was. But something inside feels slightly heavier. At first, the feeling is subtle. A short pause where enthusiasm used to be. A small drop in energy. A quiet sense that something is now off balance, even if no one else can see it. The mind naturally moves toward comparison. What happened begins to stand next to what should have happened. The expected outcome stays vivid, almost as if it still exists somewhere just out of reach, and the difference between the two becomes a source of tension. This is where disappointment begins to grow, not only from the event itself, but from the space between reality and expectation. Many people believe disappointment is caused by the outcome alone. Often, it is sustained by the negotiation that follows it. The mind returns to the moment repeatedly. It reviews what could have been said differently, what might have been done earlier, what small adjustment might have changed the direction of events. Even when nothing can be changed anymore, the internal discussion continues as if resolution might still be possible. Hours later, or even days later, the situation may still feel present. Not because the moment itself was enormous, but because attention continues to feed it. There is a quiet fatigue that comes from carrying disappointment this way, not dramatic exhaustion, but a subtle drain, the kind that makes ordinary things feel slightly heavier than they did before. Decisions take a little longer. Conversations require a bit more effort. Focus drifts back to the same unfinished emotional thread. From the outside, everything appears normal. Inside, something is still being processed long after the event has passed. A Stoic approach does not pretend disappointment doesn't exist. It does not attempt to force positivity over an experience that genuinely felt important. Instead, it quietly changes where attention rests. The outcome remains what it is. Nothing is rewritten. Nothing is erased. But the mind slowly releases the need to argue with the result. When that shift happens, something subtle changes. The pressure to mentally fix what already occurred begins to fade. Energy that was tied to replaying the moment starts to return to the present moment, where actual movement is still possible. Disappointment often feels permanent when attention is anchored in the past. When attention returns to what can still be lived, the emotional weight begins to loosen. This does not happen instantly. There is usually a short period where the mind continues to reach back, almost out of habit. It tries again to make sense of the outcome, tries again to imagine a different version of events. Over time, those mental returns become shorter, less detailed, less convincing. Eventually, the moment stops demanding as much space. What replaces it is not excitement, and not forced optimism. It is something quieter: steadiness. Steadiness allows the next decision to be made without the previous one interfering. It allows conversations to be entered without carrying the emotional residue of what didn't work earlier. It allows effort to begin again without the weight of the last outcome defining the next one. Disappointment loses much of its intensity when it is no longer asked to define what happens next. There is also a deeper realization that slowly becomes clear. Outcomes were never fully within personal control to begin with. Effort can be chosen. Preparation can be chosen. Attention can be chosen. But results are shaped by many factors that exist outside any single person's influence. When this becomes more than an idea, when it becomes something quietly accepted, disappointment changes character. It no longer feels like a personal failure every time something doesn't unfold perfectly. Instead, it becomes one of many possible outcomes that naturally accompany effort. That understanding creates a surprising form of relief. Not relief that the result changed, but relief that the mind no longer needs to carry the responsibility for everything that influenced it. From that point forward, disappointment begins to pass through more quickly. It still arrives. It still registers. But it does not settle as deeply or stay as long. Moments continue moving. Energy returns to what can still be done. The next step becomes visible again. Nothing about this looks dramatic from the outside. There is no sudden breakthrough moment that announces the change. It appears as something much simpler, a slightly calmer reaction, a shorter mental replay, a willingness to continue without needing the last outcome to feel resolved first. Over time, those small shifts create a different relationship with setbacks. Not one where disappointment disappears, but one where it stops directing the pace of life. And when disappointment stops directing the pace, something else quietly takes its place. Clarity, patience, and the ability to keep moving forward without carrying every unfinished expectation behind you. Subscribe if this reflection felt familiar. And if disappointment has ever stayed with you longer than the moment deserved, leave a comment, no explanation needed.